I'd like to move now to the presentation from CNSC staff as outlined CMD 18H 6.B and H 6.C. Mr. Frappier, you may proceed.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Jerry Frappier, and I'm the Director General of the Directorate of Power Reactor Regulation at the CNSC. With me today is Dr. Alex Victoroff, Director of Pickering Regulatory Program Division, and Ms. Heather Overton, Senior Regulatory Program Officer at the same division. Regulatory and technical staff from the CNSC are also present and available to answer questions the Commission may have. Some of our technical staff are in Ottawa and will respond via the phone link. This presentation complements CNSC staff written submission found in Supplemental CMD 18H6.B. I'll start with the purpose of the presentation. The main purpose of our presentation today is to communicate the summary of what we heard from interveners and to connect the issues raised by the interveners to the information presented to the Commission during the Part 1 hearing or in separate Commission meetings. We will provide a summary of OPG safety performance and will also update the Commission on a small number of developments that took place since the Part 1 hearing in early April. The proposed Power Reactor Operating License and Draft License Condition Handbook are attached to the CNSC staff's Supplemental CMD. We'll also discuss the changes that have been made to these two documents since the Part 1 hearing, and at the end we will present CNSC staff's conclusion and recommendation. The current Power Reactor Operating License for Pickering Nuclear Generating Station expires on August 31st, 2018. OPG has requested the license to be renewed for a period of 10 years. In support of its request for a 10-year operating license, OPG conducted a periodic safety review in accordance with CNSC's regulatory document, Reg Doc 2.3.3. A PSR is a comprehensive evaluation of design, condition, and operation of a nuclear power plant. The Pickering PSR was undertaken to confirm and enhance the safety case for continued operation of the Pickering plant. Part 1 of the Pickering license renewal hearing was held in Ottawa on April 4th, 2018, and in CMD 18H6, CNSC staff presented the Commission with the results of staff's assessment of OPG's license application. In addition, the CMD provided information regarding the CNSC oversight of Pickering safety performance over the current licensing period. OPG intends to cease commercial operation of Pickering NGS on December 31st, 2024. Therefore, the requested license period will cover 3 distinct phases: operation of the reactors on power until December 31st, 2024, a stabilization phase that will last approximately 3 to 4 years, and the beginning of safe storage. During the stabilization phase, fuel will be removed from the reactor cores and placed in the irradiated fuel bays. Most systems will be drained and de-energized. The proposed license and accompanying license condition handbook sets requirements and expectations for continued operation as well as for the transition from operation to the safe storage state. Staff recommendations regarding the license renewal application are not based only on examining the application. During the current licensing period, CNSC staff performed varied compliance activities and collected information characterizing safety performance of the facility. Around 7,000 person-days of effort is dedicated every year to evaluation of safety performance of Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, mostly through inspections and technical assessments. This slide tabulates Pickering's safety performance rating for the 14 safety and control areas during the current licensing period. In this slide, SA indicates a satisfactory rating and FS represents a fully satisfactory rating. As you can see, Pickering's performance has been satisfactory or fully satisfactory across all areas. Changes in the performance rating in 2015 and 2016 were based on the outcomes of compliance oversight activities. The decreasing ratings were due to specific inspection findings of noncompliance of limited safety significance which have since been corrected. Those were discussed during Part 1 of the hearing. I'll now pass the presentation over to Dr. Viktorov, who will discuss the key interveners' concerns and the CNSC staff's position.
Thank you, Mr. Frappier. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Victor. For the record, I am the Director of Pickering Regulatory Program Division. In this part of our presentation, we'll summarize the main issues raised by interveners with respect to the renewal of the Pickering operating license and CNSC staff responses to these issues. Many such issues were similar in nature, which allowed us to group them into common themes, as will be described below. The notice for the Commission hearing and the participant funding announcement were issued on September 29th last year. The deadline for submissions was on the 7th of May 2018, with some interveners requesting an extension for providing their submissions. A total of 156 submissions were received from private citizens, non-government organizations, and indigenous groups. And participant funding was made available to support the public participation. And there were 9 participant funding recipients for these proceedings. And those recipients will be making their own presentations during this hearing. Staff reviewed each of the interventions to understand the nature of the issues raised and to identify whether they contain new information related to the plant's safety performance, its impact on the public, and on the environment. About half of the submissions either expressed objections to the license renewal or contained certain reservations. The main themes of such interventions will be described in the subsequent slides. The other half of interventions were supportive of the continued plant operation, highlighting the importance of the Pickering nuclear generating station to the provincial and local economy and emphasizing the safety record, continuously improving performance, and many design and operational enhancements. The main topics of the public interventions are summarized on this and the next slide. The key issues raised in the interventions have been grouped by CNSC staff according to the CNSC safety and control areas. Primarily, intervener concerns fell within the following areas: fitness for service, radiation protection, environmental protection, emergency preparedness, a large number of questions related to handling of radioactive waste and the approach to decommissioning. Also, several interventions dealt with the follow-up to the Fukushima accident, protection of the containment integrity in case of a severe accident, as well as details related to the proposed license period, the end of commercial operation, and opportunities for public involvement. I will now pass the presentation to Ms. Overton, who will summarize the key issues raised by the interveners and provide an overall context for the CNSC staff position.
Thank you. It's Heather Overton for the record. I'm a Senior Regulatory Program Officer in the Pickering Regulatory Program Division. The issues related to aging impacts primarily focused on fuel channels and feeders. Notably, questions have been raised, as in the past, about the operation of the pressure tubes above 210,000 effective full power hours. Recognizing the significance of this subject, in January of this year, CNSC staff presented to the Commission detailed information on fuel channel fitness for service requirements, evaluation methodologies, and CNSC oversight activities. This presentation is included as an appendix with the supplemental CMD 18-H6.B. Given the importance of the condition of systems, structures, and components for safe operation, OPG conducts regular inspections and assessments, and CNSC staff independently verifies conclusions from such activities to confirm that applicable requirements continue to be met. Furthermore, CNSC staff reviewed OPG's condition assessments and aging management reports submitted as part of the periodic safety review. These assessments confirmed that OPG has capacity to maintain the fitness for service of systems, structures, and components important to safety. OPG and the industry continue research activities to enhance the current understanding of aging-related degradation mechanisms that could affect the operation of Pickering fuel channels. To summarize, OPG has in place adequate provisions to assure fitness for service of major components, including fuel channels and feeders. OPG has adequate capabilities to assess, verify, and manage the aging of these components through the remaining operational life. The licensee must continue to demonstrate to the CNSC that fuel channels are fit for service, considering all degradation mechanisms to allow the continued operation of the units. This slide shows the current values of the effective full power hours as of April 30th, 2018, as well as values of the effective full power hours predicted at the end of commercial operation. Also shown are the hydrogen equivalent concentrations, or HEQ, at the critical channel locations. The expected values of the HEQ are not predicted to exceed the range of model applicability. The number of effective full power hours is indicative of the overall aging effects, while hydrogen concentration relates to the critical characteristic, such as fracture toughness of pressure tubes. CNSC staff are confident that pressure tube condition is well known, aging impacts are controlled, and adequate measures can be taken should the safety margin degrade. This confidence is based on the following. First, degradation mechanisms of pressure tubes are well understood by industry and CNSC, including the limiting phenomenon of hydrogen uptake by the pressure tube material. Second, OPG has a comprehensive inspection and monitoring program in place, specifically to monitor the HEQ values. And third, a robust regulatory oversight process is in place to ensure that the licensee will meet its commitments. Comments were put forward by some interveners concerning the potential health risks associated with exposure to low doses of radiation, either during normal operation or following accidents. While some interveners feel that the risks are underestimated, others are concerned they are being overestimated. This subject has been raised in previous commission proceedings. To address this long-standing debate, in November of 2017, CNSC staff presented to the Commission on the topic of biological mechanisms acting at low doses of radiation. In the CMD 17-M46, presented staff's update on the current scientific understanding of the health risks from exposure to low doses of radiation. CNSC staff concurred with the view of the scientific community that if there was any increased risk of cancer at low doses of radiation, the risk would be small and not observable. Health risks from low doses of radiation are further minimized by the application of the as low as reasonably achievable, or LARA, principle. CNSC staff concluded that the current Canadian radiation protection regulatory framework is robust and protects workers and the public. This framework is informed by a radiation dose response model known as the linear non-threshold model. This model remains the best model on which to base the dose limits defined in the radiation protection regulations, as it is consistent with data over a wide dose range and provides a conservative estimate of risk. Many interventions dealt with the environmental impacts from the operation of the Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, including the issue of the comprehensiveness of an environmental assessment, or EA, under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, compared to an environmental assessment under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, or SCA 2012. Under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, the CNSC has a legislative mandate to ensure the protection of the environment and the health and safety of persons. If a project, such as this license renewal, is not included on the project list under SCA 2012, the CNSC undertakes an environmental assessment under the NSCA. The core scientific bases used in the NSCA EA are as rigorous as those of the SCA 2012. However, the processes are different. The CNSC EA report is produced using a number of different sources, the most important of which are shown on the right side of this slide. These sources provide up-to-date information required for the environmental assessment. An added benefit of an EA under the NSCA is that it is part of the ongoing regulatory and environmental oversight of all nuclear facilities in Canada, and in this way allows incorporation of new knowledge and best practices. CNSC staff's environmental assessment concluded that OPG has made and will continue to make adequate provisions for the protection of the environment and the health of persons. A few interventions commented on the current guidelines for tritium in drinking water. This issue has also come up at other hearings. In 2007, CNSC staff initiated the Tritium Studies Project to enhance the information available to guide regulatory oversight of tritium processing facilities and tritium releases in general. The project included a study of existing standards and guidelines for tritium in drinking water and examined the basis for the Canadian Federal Drinking Water Guidelines of 7,000 becquerels per litre. The Canadian guideline is based on the recommendations of the International Commission on Radiological Protection and the World Health Organization, and is consistent with the criteria adopted by many countries. A recent update on the Tritium Studies Project was provided to the Commission in November of 2017 in CMD 17-M48. Based on the Tritium Studies Project, CNSC staff maintain that adequate provisions have been made through the current regulatory mechanisms for the protection of Canadians from exposure to tritium releases. Results from the 2017 Pickering Environmental Monitoring Program show that tritium levels at all water supply plants are well below the 7,000 becquerels per litre provincial limit and even below the Ontario Drinking Water Advisory Council's recommendation of 20 becquerels per litre. The results support the conclusion that the dose to the member of the public due to exposure from tritium releases is a small fraction of the regulatory dose limit. Another issue related to environmental protection involves tritium in groundwater. In particular, several interveners felt that insufficient information had been provided about the concentration of tritium in groundwater within the Pickering site. In accordance with regulatory reporting requirements, OPG annually submits a Pickering Groundwater Monitoring Results Report. According to the 2017 annual report, groundwater samples were collected from 132 sampling points. Groundwater samples were analyzed mainly for tritium. However, select samples were also analyzed for other non-radioactive contaminants. The results show that tritium concentration trends over time at most monitored locations have remained nearly constant or decreased. However, at the Unit 5 and 6 reactor building areas, elevated tritium concentrations in groundwater were identified starting in 2016. OPG conducted an investigation and determined the source of the elevated tritium was due to leakage from the Unit 5 moderator room through construction joints in the foundation slab. The construction joints were subsequently resealed, and tritium concentrations in the Unit 5 ground tubes have since declined significantly. A similar investigation and repairs have recently been completed at Unit 6. CNSC staff have initiated regulatory actions to ensure that the root causes of the situation are addressed. Elevated tritium concentration in groundwater is mainly localized within the station's protected area, with no groundwater flow to Lake Ontario from this area. The monitoring confirmed that at the site perimeter, concentrations of tritium in groundwater remain low, indicating no off-site impacts. Many interveners identified emergency preparedness as their primary area of concern. In general, the issues relate to consistency of national and international standards for emergency preparedness and the adequacy of provisions under the Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan. With respect to the licensing basis framework for emergency preparedness at Pickering, CNSC staff verified and confirmed that Pickering Nuclear Generating Station meets the regulatory requirements of Reg Doc 2.10.1 for emergency preparedness. Plans, procedures, and equipment. The requirements and guidance in Reg Doc 210.1 are based on and consistent with modern national and international practices, in particular those of the IAEA. The Canadian requirements establish a modern, risk-informed approach which considers a full spectrum of possible events, including events of greatest consequence to the public. CNSC staff also confirmed that Ontario's Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan conforms to CSA Standard N1600 and IAEA document GSR-7. CNSC requires demonstration that the likelihood of accidents with serious radiological consequences is extremely low, with an emphasis on prevention and mitigation of severe accidents. Regardless, following the Fukushima accident, improvements were implemented at all the nuclear power plants in Canada, including Pickering, to enhance capabilities to respond in case of an unlikely severe or multi-unit accident. The Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan was updated in 2017 to reflect the most recent developments in national and international standards. A provincial discussion paper was released to the public in 2017, and the comments were disposed by a special advisory group. The planning zone sizes were confirmed, with an addition of the contingency planning zone out to 20 kilometers. The current Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan recommendations for thyroid blocking protective action levels also align with international guidance. As well, the Provincial Master Plan has now been supplemented by the Implementing Plan for Pickering Nuclear Generating Station. The Commission heard a comprehensive update on the recent changes in the Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan provided by the Ontario Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management on the 4th of April of this year in CMD 18-M21. For illustration, this slide is showing the detailed planning zone, which extends out to the 10 kilometers from the site, and the new contingency planning zone in the 10 to 20 kilometer zone from the station. Not shown in this diagram is the ingestion planning zone, which extends out to 50 kilometers from the station. Several interventions commented on waste management and decommissioning plans. Broadly, there were 4 issues identified: the comprehensiveness of the Canadian regulatory framework for nuclear waste and decommissioning, the strategy and location for long-term and permanent disposal of OPG's radioactive waste, the robustness of current on-site waste storage facilities, and the financial and social impacts of delayed decommissioning on current and future generations. The CNSC's regulatory approach for radioactive waste is based on the Nuclear Safety and Control Act and is articulated in CNSC regulatory documents. These regulatory documents draw upon and are consistent with recommendations of the IAEA and best practices from the international and national communities. The Government of Canada's radioactive waste policy framework sets the stage for institutional and financial arrangements to manage radioactive waste. The framework recognizes that long-term management arrangements may be different for various categories of radioactive wastes, such as used nuclear fuel and low and intermediate level radioactive waste. The federal government is responsible for developing policy and for regulating and overseeing radioactive waste producers, while the licensee is responsible for funding, organization, management, and operation of the facilities required to safely manage their wastes over the short and long terms. The next two slides provide a breakdown of the amount of nuclear waste on the Pickering site. This table shows the amount of high-level radioactive waste or used nuclear fuel, including current and projected to the end of commercial operation. The projected numbers were independently calculated by CNSC staff. These numbers are approximate and may change depending on the actual operating conditions. In 2007, the Government of Canada selected the Adaptive Phase Management Approach developed by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization for the safe and secure long-term management of used nuclear fuel. The activity is presently in the site selection stage for siting a deep geological repository. This slide provides the current and projected inventories of intermediate and low-level waste stored on the Pickering site. Intermediate and low-level waste is primarily stored at the Western Waste Management Facility in Tiverton, Ontario. With regards to low and intermediate level radioactive waste, OPG has recognized that a permanent solution is required to safely dispose of such waste. The current project proposed by OPG is to prepare the site and construct a deep geological disposal facility on the Bruce site. Note that waste management facilities possess their own operating licenses, which are separate and independent from the power reactor operating license. The CNSC renewed the Pickering Waste Facility License in April of 2018 for a 10-year period. Regarding the third issue, the robustness of current on-site waste storage facilities, the safety analysis for these facilities takes into account potential malevolent acts and natural hazards and are submitted to the CNSC staff for review and acceptance on a 5-year basis. Used fuel is categorized as Category 2 nuclear material in accordance with the Nuclear Security Regulations and the International Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. Licensees that store Category 2 nuclear material within their nuclear facility must have adequate security measures in place. CNSC staff verifies that the used fuel generated at Pickering Nuclear Generating Station is safely and securely stored at the Pickering Waste Management Facility sites within protected areas. All nuclear material processed, stored, and transported by OPG is protected in accordance with regulations. Finally, regarding the issue with delayed decommissioning and financial and social impacts, the CNSC requires that planning for decommissioning takes place throughout a facility's life cycle. A preliminary decommissioning plan, or PDP, is in place for the Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, with the latest revision approved by the Commission in 2017. In the PDP, OPG selected a deferred decommissioning strategy to allow for radiation levels to decay prior to station dismantling and demolition. The dismantling and demolition stage is expected to begin around 2050, and decommissioning is expected to be completed in 2065. The PDP also serves as the basis for the decommissioning cost estimate, which in turn is used to determine the amount of the financial guarantee that OPG must have in order to ensure that sufficient funds are available to decommission the facility. OPG maintains a consolidated financial guarantee for all of the nuclear facilities it owns. As of December 31st, 2017, this financial guarantee was valued at about $21 billion, which exceeds the minimum required amount of approximately $16.5 billion for 2018. I'll now pass the presentation back to Dr. Viktorov, who will continue discussing other issues identified by interveners.
Thank you. Once again, it's Alex Viktorov for the record. Many interveners made reference to the 2011 Fukushima accident and expressed concerns with the Pickering ability to cope with accidents due to its age and design. Following the Fukushima accident, CNSC established an action plan to ensure that essential lessons were applied in Canada to enhance the safety of all nuclear facilities. All Fukushima action plans have been completed. OPG has implemented many design modifications and safety upgrades at Pickering, which have substantially reduced the likelihood of severe accidents as demonstrated by probabilistic safety analysis. CNSC staff CMD 17-M64 was presented at the Commission meeting in December of the last year to provide to Commission members and the public the results of the probabilistic safety analysis for the whole Pickering site. Those results show that the site that is aggregated for all units, core damage frequency, and the site large release frequency are less than the safety goal established for a single unit. Examples of safety enhancements are listed on this slide. The Fukushima Action Plan enhancements have resulted in increased containment robustness. The Periodic Safety Review Integrated Implementation Plan will further bring improvements in the plant defense in depth. Given the multiple engineered provisions to protect the physical barriers at Pickering, a severe accident will be prevented or stopped within calendar year, thus alleviating any challenges to containment. In the unlikely case where a severe accident progresses further, venting will be controlled and filtered. In the PSR Integrated Implementation Plan, an additional modification dealing with assuring an alternative venting pathway is scheduled for completion by June 2019. Additional measures will further reduce the likelihood of an accident of happening or progressing to challenge the containment integrity. The last issue that I will discuss relates to the proposed 10-year license and the end of commercial operation for Pickering. As mentioned earlier, OPG conducted a periodic safety review supporting the license renewal application and covering a 10-year period. On this basis, and given that placing reactors in the shutdown state does not pose new or increased safety risk, CNSC staff considers a 10-year license duration to be in line with the requirements and best practices. Nevertheless, CNSC staff recognize that approaching shutdown and transition to safe storage will require special license provisions. The proposed license contains a site-specific license condition 15.4. Should OPG decide or be required to operate any unit beyond December 31st, 2024, this license condition will stipulate that OPG notifies the Commission of its intent to operate any unit beyond this date. As this would constitute a change in the licensing basis, the Commission approval will be required. In addition, License Condition 15.4 requires OPG to implement and maintain plans for the end of commercial operation, namely a sustainable operations plan covering activities prior to the shutdown and a stabilization activity plan covering activities following the shutdown. CNSC staff report annually to the Commission on performance of nuclear power plants through the regulatory oversight report at a public commission meeting. This will offer an annual opportunity for the public to provide input to the Commission. Finally, I would like to provide an update on some developments that relate to the relicensing process. First, during the Part 1 hearing, the Commission heard about the Pickering environmental risk assessment and the clarification that was being sought from OPG regarding some of the report's conclusions. Following the Part 1 hearing, a discussion was held between OPG, CNSC, and Environment and Climate Change Canada, whereby OPG was able to provide additional clarification to the satisfaction of both regulators. As a result, there are no outstanding regulatory concerns with regard to the environmental risk assessment for the Pickering site. Also, in April, CNSC staff accepted that changes to the derived release limits and environmental action levels are within the licensing basis. OPG is expected to implement these changes by January 1st, 2019, and the license condition handbook will be updated accordingly. With regards to the emergency preparedness, the Pickering implementing plan has been updated following the 2017 revision of the Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan and is now available on the Office of the Fire Marshal and Emergency Management website. The implementing plan applies the principles, concepts, and policies contained in the master plan in order to provide detailed guidance and direction for dealing with emergencies at the site. Lastly, the observations and lessons from the Unified Control Emergency Exercise were summarized in several reports. This emergency exercise, simulating a response to a severe accident, was conducted in December 2017 and involved over 30 organizations on the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. The recently completed evaluation by OPG, CNSC, and independent experts concluded that the capability to respond to an emergency at Pickering Nuclear Generating Station meets the requirements and is adequate to protect the health and safety of the public. Next, I will summarize the changes to the proposed power reactor operating license and the license condition handbook that have been made since the Part 1 hearing in April. As detailed in CNSC Staff CMD 18-H6 presented at Part 1 hearing, OPG is seeking Commission approval to operate Pickering Unit 5 to 8 fuel channels up to 295,000 effective full power hours. This is the maximum operating time expected for the lead unit before the end of commercial operation on December 31st, 2024. One of the principal factors influencing the pressure tube material properties is the hydrogen equivalent concentration, or HEQ. Based on the current HEQ predictions, the lead Pickering channels are not expected to reach 120 parts per million before the end of the target service life in any unit. This concentration represents the upper validity limit for the approved pressure tube fracture toughness model. Regardless, CNSC staff have recommended a specific license condition to assure the presence of adequate compliance verification criteria should the projected HEQ predictions exceed 120 parts per million before the end of pressure tube target service life. For consistency with the recommendation made by the Commission to CNSC staff during Bruce Power license renewal hearing, CNSC staff have subsequently strengthened the language in license condition 15.3. Additional clarification has also been incorporated in the License Condition Handbook. This modification does not change CNSC staff recommendation that the Commission approve the operation of Pickering Unit 5 to 8 fuel channels up to a maximum of 295,000 effective full power hours. CNSC staff also updated the text in the draft License Condition Handbook. This included both technical administrative changes as outlined in Supplemental CMD 18-H6.B. None of the proposed changes constitutes relaxation in the regulatory oversight requirements. The updated draft LCH is also attached in the supplementary CMD for the Commission's information. I will now hand over the presentation back to Mr. Frappier, who will conclude staff presentation with a summary of our conclusions and recommendations.
Thank you, Alex. Jerry Frappier for the record. The CNSC staff conclusion and recommendations provided in CMD 18-H6 remain the same. Namely, the CNSC staff conclude with respect to paragraph 24, subparagraph 4, that the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, that the OPG is qualified to carry on the activities authorized by the license and will, in carrying out that activity, make adequate provisions for the protection of the environment, the health and safety of persons, and the maintenance of national security, and measures required to implement international obligations to which Canada has agreed. CNSC staff recommend that the Commission accept CNSC staff's conclusion and exercise its authority under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act to renew the license to authorize OPG to carry out the activities listed in Part 4 of the license from September 1st, 2018 to August 31st, 2028. It is also recommended that the Commission authorize OPG to operate Pickering Units 5 to 8 fuel channels up to a maximum of 295,000 effective full power hours. With respect to License Condition 3.2, CNSC staff recommend the Commission delegate the authority for consent to restart a reactor after a serious process failure to the following CNSC staff: the Director, Pickering Regulatory Program Division, the Director General, Directorate of Power Reactor Regulation, and the Executive Vice President and Chief Regulatory Operations Officer for the Regulatory Operations Branch. This delegation of authority would remain unchanged from the current license. Furthermore, CNSC staff recommend that the Commission accept the standardized and station-specific conditions included in the proposed license. The 6 license conditions specific to Pickering Nuclear Generating Station require OPG to implement the Integrated Implementation Plan, maintain Units 2 and 3 in safe storage state, before hydrogen equivalent concentrations exceeds 120 parts per million, demonstrate that pressure tube fracture toughness will be sufficient for safe operation beyond 120 parts per million, implement and maintain plans for the end of commercial operation, implement and maintain a Cobalt-60 program, and limit the activities of import and export of nuclear substances to those occurring as contaminants in laundry, packaging, shielding, or equipment. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Commission. We are prepared to respond to any questions you may have regarding this presentation.
Okay, thank you.